Okay, this week's episode is a Parsha's Bechukosai. The Parsha Bechukosai, we read the Teichacha, which contains all the klolos, the consequences for those who don't do the will of Hashem, Rachmana litzlan. The Parsha, however, Parsha Bechukosai opens with the positives. If you keep Torah mitzvahs, like you're supposed to, then you're zoichet the brachas. The rain comes, the crop grows, everything's good. As is famous, Rashi comments on the very beginning of the Parsha, Im Bechukosai teilechu. If you go in the ways of my chukim, says Rashi, Tiyu amelim ba'Torah. If you toil in learning Torah, then the Psukim continue to be zeichet all the brachas. So this begs the first question that we want to address together. Why is it that amelus ba'Torah, toiling in Torah, is considered such a significant element of Yiddishkeit, of Shmiras HaTorah v'Mitzvahs, that it's the opening condition of the brachas? If you toil in Torah, then the rest can flow. And note, the words used are not learning Torah, but toiling in Torah. Why is that so significant? And as a follow-on from that, some Mefarshim, not Rashi himself, but other Mefarshim, say that when the Psukim begin to describe the other side of the coin, the reverse, that what happens if a person does not keep the Torah, which it begins with the words V'im Bechukosai Tim Osu, say Mefarshim, this is actually a reverse of that which was the opening of the brachas. Just like the brachas come to a person who toils in Torah, so too Rachmana litzlan, the consequences, the klolos, will come to a person who does not toil in Torah. And again, this is the second part of that question. Why is it that toiling in Torah is considered such a significant part of Yiddishkeit that brachas and klolos of Bechukosai are going to hinge upon this? The second question goes like this. The Gemara Megillah Lamed Aleph on the base tells us, Ezra tiken lehem Yisrael. Ezra was masaking for Klal Yisrael that they should read the klolos before Atzeres, before Shovuos, and that which is in Dvarim, in Sefer Dvarim, before Rosh Hashanah. Why? So Abai or Rosh Hashanah say, Kedei shetichle shana v'kidul loisel, so that year should end and its klolos should end. In other words, just like Rosh Hashanah in Tishri is the beginning of a new year, by definition that means it's the end of an old year. We read the klolos before then as if to draw a line under that year and say, let's have a fresh start. So too, says the Gemara, before the Rosh Hashanah of Shovuos. What is Shovuos or Rosh Hashanah for? The Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah tells us, Rosh Hashanah lePeiros HaIlon. So before the Shovuos Rosh Hashanah of Peiros HaIlon, we should read the Teichacha as a way of cleaning the slate and ending the previous year. In fact, Poskim say that we should decorate our shuls with trees because of this Rosh Hashanah of Peiros HaIlon. Now, whether we do or don't, it's subject to the Gaon, etc., criticism, whether we do nowadays, but fundamentally it comes from the fact that the Shavuos is Rosh Hashanah of Peiros HaIlon. And the second question we want to ask is, what does this Rosh Hashanah of Peiros HaIlon have to do with us? Why does it involve us? Yeah, let the Rebbeinu Shalom decide which trees should have fruit. What's it going to do with us? Why are we making a song and dance about it? Why are we reading the Teichacha before that Rosh Hashanah? So let's establish a few principles, and then we'll come back, Be'ez Hashem, and answer these questions. So first of all, there is the Shla. I believe it's famous, but the Shla in Shnei Luchos Abris, Aseres Adibris, Mesechas Shavuos, Nemitzvah Chof Ches. The Shla brings from Telas Yaakov, first of all, the concept that Rosh Hashanah is a hischadshus. It's a moment of a renewal in the world, when we remember once again how the Rebbeinu Shalom created the world. As we say on Rosh Hashanah, Zeh hayom tchilas ma'asecha. So too, says the Telas Yaakov, Matan Torah is an opportunity for us to be misboinen, for us to reflect, and for us to realize that it's the beginning of the world. It's Chidush ha'olam, because we know that ultimately the world was only created for Torah, etc. But then he says very strong words. Referring to these fruits that we're talking about, that there's a Rosh Hashanah for Peiros HaIlon on Shavuos. HaPeiros Oheim, says the Telas Yaakov brought in the Shlah, Hey man Neshomois HaPorchois Me'ilonois Shlakadosh Baruch Hu. The Peiros, the fruits, are the Neshomos, are our souls, as it were, growing out of the tree of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And what does this mean, says the Shlah? V'ha'olam nidoin b'yom zeh al ha'torah shenitna boy. People, the world, is judged on this day for the Torah that was given on Shovuos. Shebotlu atzmo mimeno, for people who unfortunately have forsaken the learning of Torah. V'hu amram al peiros ha'ilam. This is what it means that it's a Rosh Hashanah for peiros ha'ilam. So this Rosh Hashanah that we've been talking about from the Mishnah, of course, literally speaking, means to refer to a judgment that's being made on which trees should produce fruit and how much. Of course. But the Shlah says there's also a hidden Rosh Hashanah within Shovuos, which is relevant to us. And that Rosh Hashanah is Rosh Hashanah of Neshamas. In other words, of our spiritual potential. But not just a decision about our spiritual potential, specifically as it pertains to the acquirement of Torah. It's relevant specifically to judging us on our learning of Torah. Just like we have on Rosh Hashanah and Tishri. How well did we do last year? What's the plan for the next year? What Siyata D'Shmaya do we deserve in our learning and growth of Torah? What's interesting to note, having said this, is that on Rosh Hashanah and Tishri, beginning of the year, we have an entire program around this concept that it's the beginning of a new year. Of course, our tefillas are unique and geared towards asking Kadosh Baruch Hu, let's have health, let's have Chaim. We repeat the Chaim so many times over Rosh Hashanah, Ases Meitzuvah. We are geared up to the theme of this being a Rosh Hashanah and making use of that Rosh Hashanah. And yet, if you look at Shovuos, we don't have a single tefillah that speaks to this tefillah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, help us out here with our Torah this year. At least not more tefillahs than we would regularly daven. And I think even what's more, it would, in my mind, perhaps, make a little bit of sense to have it mandated in halacha that we should have a Seder Limud on Shovuos. If Shovuos, the essence of Shovuos is a day of respecting and being misboyin and reflecting on our learning of Torah and our commitment to learning of Torah, and we're asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says, surely it makes sense to have a program around that. Let's have mandated in halacha, everybody has to learn X amount or this type of limud or something that mandates limud Torah. And it's a very strange thing. Shovuos, yes, there's been hogib, there's there at night, and of course every good Jew likes to learn and tries to learn as much as he can, but essentially there's nothing mandated in halacha. So that's a strange observation. So we'll come back to explain this. I think I've got a Gavaldig Pshat. But before we do so, I just want to speak for 1 minute about learning Torah. And I want to preface this by saying this as follows. There's women watching and listening to Hashem as well. So they shouldn't think this is just going to be something relevant to men. Women, at the very least, are there to support the menfolk within their life with their Torah, and by having a perspective on Torah and the importance of the role of Limud Torah, they will be able to be more energized and able to be more supportive of the menfolk in their life. But I'm going to keep this very, very simple, and I'm going to say something that people will have very likely heard in yeshiva and perhaps even been traumatized by hearing it in yeshiva, and I want you to put all that to the side and just listen to the facts as they are. I'm going to bring out something very, very encouraging and very inspiring from it. In the Hakdama to Sefer Mailas HaTorah, which is written by my ancestor Avram, the brother of Vilna Gaon, and in the Hakdama he explains why he wanted to write this Sefer, which, as you can imagine from its title, Mailas HaTorah, is about the value, the importance of learning Torah. Why did he want to write this Sefer? By the way, at the end of the Sefer, he writes that one should try and learn through his Sefer once a month. Yeah, I don't do so, but he writes that it was recommended one should learn once a month. The idea being that you stay within this realm of his chizuk for learning Torah. But I want to quote you one sentence from his Akdama, and although it's his words, his style is to say things and bring back up from Gemaras and Zoyas, and there's no question that this also is something that's a definitive statement, but he's saying it based on all the previous sources. And he says as follows. I efsha lovoi l'shum maila oi midah tova oi l'shum dvar yira rak al yedei Torah. It is impossible for a person to arrive at any single virtue, for a person to acquire any midah tova, for a person to lay claim to a dvar yira of yiras shomayim without learning Torah. It's just impossible. That's quite a statement. He says another line which will be relevant to people. V'chol hatzorois habois oleinu tomid hu machmas bittul Torah. And tzoros, Rachmana litzlan, hard times that befall us, Klal Yisrael, it's because of forsaking the learning of Torah. What you have demonstrated here, and as I say, people will have heard this before, but I want to bring out a certain point. What you have demonstrated here is that learning Torah is not just another mitzvah. The Torah is full of mitzvahs. So there's a mitzvah called learning Torah. In the same way a person might approach any mitzvah that he has to sort of get through the day and do, so we also got to do a bit of learning Torah. What's laid out here and is mirrored in many other sources is that the learning of Torah is the key to growth as a Yid. The learning of Torah is key to lead a person to becoming a better person, a Baal Midas. Real service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is possible only through the fact that a person is dedicated and learns Torah. Why is that? So here's the way I want to explain it. There's two parts to the chiyuv, if you want to call it that, the chiyuv of learning Torah. There's two parts of learning Torah. The simpler one to understand when it comes to learning Torah. Why is it necessary? Why is it important? What's the great significance that learning Torah plays in our life? Well, it's very simple. In order to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu through Torah mitzvahs, you've got to kind of know what you're doing. So you need to learn Torah. There's a chiyuv of Yidiyas Torah. You need to learn Torah to know Torah. The Chavetz Chaim writes in his Akdama to Hilchos Shabbos, if you don't learn Hilchos Shabbos, you're going to probably transgress on some form of Hilchos Shabbos. You need to learn to know. That's more the simpler version, simpler way of understanding, and it's true. And it has its place. But I want to point to something more subtle. Something that has an even bigger value in the learning of Torah. And that is that through learning Torah, and by the way, and I'm going to say this later clearer, but we're not talking about amounts of time here. I'm talking about the concept. Through learning Torah, a person gets to live a Torah experience of life. That's the point that I want to focus on for a moment. So let's explain it a bit more. In Parsha Bechukosai, there's a Medrash Tanchuma. Quite a shah for Medrash Tanchuma. He quotes the pasuk in Mishlei, Pri Tzadik Eitz Chaim, fruits of a tzaddik, tree of life. And the context in which he's talking is the Parsha within Bechukosai, which is Eruchin. When a person wants to offer up his value to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's considered as like a person sacrificing himself by dedicating his value of himself to Hashem. There's halachas of how a person should do that. Referring to that, coming off the back of that, the Medrash writes like this, Im Yihya Odom Tzadik. If a person is a righteous person, Af al pi shehu tzadik ve'einoi oisek b'Torah, even though he's a tzaddik, he just doesn't learn Torah, ein biyodoi klum. Ein biyodoi klum. This isn't some Litvasher Rosh Hashiva saying this. This is Medrash Tanchuma. A guy who is a righteous person, he just doesn't learn Torah, ein biyodoi klum. He's got nothing. And he goes on to say that Pri Tzadik Eitz Chaim means that through, you want to be a real tzaddik, you want to really grow, the only way to do that is with the Eitz Chaim, with Torah. And he makes a reference to Yiftach HaGil'odi in Tanakh. Yiftach, we don't have time to get into the whole story, and there's a whole arichas in the Medrash about this, and you're welcome to check it out. But Yiftach came back from a Muhammad, and he promised that anyone, the first thing that comes out of his house is going to offer up as a korban. And sadly for him, the first thing that came out was his daughter. And at least the Medrash Tanchuma's version of the story is that he had to actually be makriv of his daughter, he had to sacrifice his daughter. He lost his daughter because of his slightly ill-advised statement. Says the Medrash, Kach at moitze b'yiftach hagiladi mipnei shelo hoya ben Torah ibad est bitoy. Because he wasn't a ben Torah, he lost his daughter. So first of all, the Madrash says a tzaddik is someone who becomes a tzaddik through learning Torah. And he says a Yiftach, in criticizing Yiftach for making this terrible mistake, and he said Hashem was not happy with him, the reason why he made that mistake was because he wasn't a Ben Torah. Now, listen here, there was no kolim at the time of the Medrash Tanchuma. So this concept, this modern day use of the term Ben Torah, which we like to talk about, and we generally refer to people in kollel, etc., that's not what the Medrash is talking about. So what does the Medrash mean? What does the Medrash mean when it says that he wasn't a Ben Torah, that's why he made his mistake? What's going on here? Where I'm going with this is to point to this element of learning Torah, which is not about Yediyas HaTorah. There's a type of learning of Torah, which the learning itself purifies the person. The learning itself gives and implants the person with Yiras Shamayim, with Midas Tovas, with the right way of coming through life. It gives the person the framework through which a person can live a moral, rich, righteous life, al pi devar Hashem. And such a type of life, such a type of lens to view life through, comes when a person is Isaac Batera. He sees the world differently. He experiences people differently. And Rechaim Pinchas Scheinberg Zatzal speaks this out, literally detailed, as is brought in Sefer Techachas Musa, which is a collection of all his shmuzin, which was done actually after his lifetime. But he speaks it out very beautifully. There's two types of Torah, and he speaks about the fact that the first type of Torah is just to learn in order to know, and you have to know the halachas. But he said this type of Torah, this type of learning isn't necessarily a learning that's going to change the person. It's important, it's part of your chiyuv, it's part of what you got to do, but that's not the type of learning that changes the person materially. Says Rav Chaim Pinchas, there's a bigger madrega in learning of Torah, and that's the type of Torah that's learned when a person enters an experience of learning Torah, where the Torah actually has an effect on them. The Torah changes them, the Torah elevates them, the Torah changes their way of life, the way of thinking, the way of experiencing life. And here comes the key line, which we're going to bring it all back to. V'nireh, says Rav Chaim Pinchas, the ha'odom zoiche l'madrega sha'alimut mashpia al tivoi rak al yedei amelus b'Torah. This type of acquiring Torah, this type of experiential learning, where the learning of Torah elevates a person, where the learning of Torah gives a person a different type of framework from which to live life. That comes to a person when they learn, but specifically when they learn with toiling in Torah. That is a Ben Torah. The Ben Torah of the Medrash is referring to a type of person, is talking about a type of life that is lived with a person who's dedicated to learning of Torah, that they push themselves to toil in Torah. With such a person, the Torah has an effect on, in all ways and in all avenues, that they're able to grow spiritually and grow as a person and grow close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When they walk down the street, they're experiencing life from the lens of Torah because of their investment and their personal toil in Torah. That's the type of person that doesn't make mistakes, like coming out like Yiftach did, with a statement which is just well left field, of whatever comes out of my house. And the Medrash says, he said even a chazir, and he says shocking things. Because of his excitement in the moment, he completely lost sight of perspective and lost himself in the moment. A Ben Torah, someone who learns Torah with toiling in Torah, in a way that Torah has an impact on him. A person like that doesn't lose themselves that quickly, doesn't get sucked into the perhaps the influences of the world in the same way. A person like that is able to see things through the lens of Torah. So we talk about toiling in Torah. What does toiling in Torah mean? What does Amelus look like? See, I believe Amelus is unique to every individual. If Reb Chaim Kanievsky would ask the question, the answer was going to look like what he did all his life. You know, learning some 20 hours a day, Bahasmoda, finishing Korah Torah Kula every year. Likewise, Rav Elyashiv, slept 4 hours a night, barely. That's Amelus B'Torah. That's someone who's invested in Torah, toiling in Torah. Givaldik, that's good for them. What about for us? Amelus B'Torah, toiling in Torah, is finding the sweet spot where you are pushing yourself according to your capabilities. That's what Amelus B'Torah means. Amelus does not look the same for every person. There's no set standard. If you've worked all day in the office, you come home, you're tired, you can't be bothered going to your chavrusa. But you overcome that laziness and you get in the Beis HaMikdash and you put yourself into the learning, that's Amelus B'Torah. You've done Gemara. You can't be bothered doing Chazorah. Everybody's got Yitzhar to hold them back. But we know the sweetness of Chazorah Lamaisa, and we really enjoy it when we do it. But everyone's got their hang-ups as to why not right now, etc. I'll do it in 5 minutes. I want to rest first. And all the cheshbonis you want to make. But if you stand up and you find that resilience and you dedicate yourself and you do that Chazorah, you're being amal in Torah. That type of learning is the learning that's going to enable your growth. It's that type of learning. It's that investment in the learning. It's that putting yourself into the learning. That is the type of learning about which a person will gain the lens through which he can live life differently. The experience of life will be different because of their investment in the learning of Torah, because of their toiling in Torah. You know, we asked before, Shovuos, we made an interesting observation about Shovuos as opposed to Rosh Hashanah. Why is it, if Shovuos is ultimately a Rosh Hashanah for learning Torah, why don't we have a mandated Seder Limud in Halacha that tells us we have to learn? Specific structure of learning. My opinion, the answer is simple. Because learning Torah is individual. And it's too individual to mandate. For one guy, 20 minutes Mishnayos is unbelievable. But for the other guy, no less than 4 hours be'iyun with Rishonim, Achronim, and Poskim. Each person has to learn Torah with toiling in Torah according to what makes sense to them, to their skills, to their circumstances, to their capabilities, to the limitations within which they live. Rosh Hashanah of Torah on Shovuos is davka opaque. It's precisely supposed to be that a person has the space and the opportunity to dictate to themselves and to figure out for themselves on this day, what does Limud HaTorah mean to me? What am I capable of? The Torah is giving us an opportunity on Shovuos by not mandating a specific tefillah to ask for a specific type of success in Torah, by not mandating a specific type of learning or length of time to learn. It's individual. We know the principle. The principle is Shovuos is a time to daven for Siyata Yishmaya, to succeed in Ruchnias. It's a Rosh Hashanah for the Neshamas. We get the principle. Now what it translates to each person, everyone's an individual in this. Everyone's an individual. And in the same way that a person can approach any Yom Tov, Rosh Hashanah, Tishri, and make of it something, and grow from it. And with the Rosh Hashanah, with the coming of Rosh Hashanah, a person uses that as an opportunity to think about what they want from the year and what they would like to commit to the year. People make Kabbalahs, people do all sorts of things in preparation for those high holy days. We should have the same attitude to Shovuos. Take the time before Shovuos, preferably, to think about what type of year of Ruchnias do I want? And what am I capable of doing? What can I tell the Rebbeinu Shalom I'm going to commit to doing? Nothing big, nothing dramatic. No one's suggesting we should leave what we do and go and learn Kollel all day. That's not what it's about. It's about every Yid finding their sweet spot, and being omol, being committed, being invested in that learning of Torah. You know, Baal Habos sometimes feel, yeah, it's all very nice. Shavuos in yeshiva has sort of made sense. You know, we were learning Torah all day anyway, so Shavuos is like a Rosh Hashanah for Torah and the Shlah. It's not really my Yom Tov. It's a mistake. Shavuos belongs to every single one of us. Every single Yid has a chelik in Torah. And we have to believe that, we have to see it, and it should inspire us to make something of Shavuos. Rambam writes, every single Yid has to learn Torah. It doesn't matter about your circumstance. Bein Oni, Bein Osher, you're poor, you're rich, your person's not well, person's healthy. It doesn't make a difference. Everyone has to learn. So if everyone has to learn anyway, make something of it. Invest in it. Own it. Seek that sweet spot of Masha Li Bechofetz and own it and work towards it and daven to the Rebbeinu Shalom v'siyata v'shmaya in it, so that the Torah will impact us and will become better people, and it will feed into the other she'ifos that a person may have in terms of becoming a better person, about midas Torah and about emunah and tshuva and all the other things that we want as Yidden. The Torah is the key to that growth. And what type of Torah? A Torah which is ba'amelos, a Torah which is toiling, a Torah which is the type of learning that you're pushing yourself, that you're really trying to engage with Torah according to your capabilities. Now let's come back to the Parsha. We began with a question. In Bechukosai Telechu, says Rashi famously, Shetiyu Amelim Torah, that all the brachas that have been promised by HaKadosh Baruch Hu hinge upon a person toiling in Torah. And we asked, why? Well, I ask you, after hearing what we've said today, you think there's another way to live life without Amelus B'Torah? We know what Torah and mitzvahs are there for. We've said it before, we said it recently. Torah and mitzvahs are there l'zachech, l'sakein, in order for us to be able to grow. Yiddishkeit is supposed to be growth oriented. That's what it's about. Is it possible to get growth through any other means? We already said what the Medrash said. You're not a tzaddik without Torah. Don't think you can grow close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the same way just by doing chesed. It comes down to the amelus HaTorah. It comes down to the person investing in their limud HaTorah in the right way. This is the only way a person grows. And if that's the case, is it a surprise that the brachas of Bechukosai hinge upon amelus B'Torah? That's the key. He who is Amal B'Torah has unlocked the key to growth, to coming close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to leveraging his entire life of Torah mitzvahs in a way that will make him a better person. Gewaldig! Such a person should be gebenched. And unfortunately, the reverse is also true. Someone who doesn't invest in Torah enough, someone who doesn't do what they're capable of in terms of learning Torah properly, sadly, they belong to the other category of it, Bechukosai Temasu. No, they won't have a gebenched life in the same way. So just to conclude with a summary of what we've learned. We asked, as we just answered now, we asked, why is toiling in Torah such a significant condition upon which all the brachas rely upon? And why is it that the reverse is true? By not toiling in Torah, a person doesn't get the brachas. So we're saying Amelus B'Torah is the key. It's not an extra, it's not a nicety, it's not just another mitzvah to do, it's the key to growth. And if Torah and mitzvahs is there for us to become better people, we need Amelus B'Torah. In Bechukosai Telechu, if you're going by Amelus B'Torah, then all the rest will flow from there. But if a person unfortunately forsakes that, then not. We asked, we said Shovuos, Rosh Hashanah for Parsha Elon, what does that have to do with us? Why is Parsha Elon anything to do with us? We said from the Shlah. The Shlah says, Shovuos is a Rosh Hashanah for our Neshamas. But not in a vague way, in a very specific way. Shovuos hones in on our learning of Torah. And that's what it means, Parsha Elon, with the Neshamas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's tree. On Shovuos, it is our Rosh Hashanah where it is decided on the spiritual gains that we're going to make that year. So we asked, if that's the case, why is there no mitzvahs hayom on Shovuos pertaining to that? If it's such a big part of the day, why is it that there's no Rosh Hashanah related, Torah related exercise mandated by in halacha? And we explained that this isn't a simple thing to standardize. It's not like there's a gold standard anyone has to feel pressure to meet. Every person is an individual, and every person has to find their way of acquiring Torah, their way of connecting to Torah. And as I said, it could be Chumash, Mishnayos, Gemara, and Halacha. It doesn't make a difference what part of Torah it is. As long as it's genuine and authentic to that person, that it's Masha Lipoy Chofetz, that it's V'sein Chalkeinu B'Seira Secha, that person can learn Torah and engage in Torah and feel experience of connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through Torah to the best of his ability. That's all that's being asked of us. That can't be something that's mandated in halacha as a standard. That's something that has to be much more opaque. Sadly, that means that some people might miss the boat. Unfortunately, that's what happens. But at least we know about this, and we know the precious offering that Shovuos is giving for us, and we're way ahead because we've got so many days of Achana before Shovuos. Hashem should help us that we should gain the clarity that we need to come to Shovuos in the right way, to maximize Shovuos in the right way, and pizoicha to all the brachas of the Bechukosai.